Welcome, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for PronSIG's first fully online conference. My name is Gemma Archer and I'm here with Adam Scott and we are PronSIG's joint coordinators. Alongside us is Beata Waleszak, our webmaster and social media coordinator, and also the latest and newest members of the SIG, Kristina Czerwinkova-Poesova and Tarek Uzun, the new joint assistant editors of our biannual journal Speak Out, plus Taylor Vega and Victor Hugo Medina Suarez, our new joint webinar coordinators. You're going to hear from all of us at some point today in one of our conference rooms and even in some of the presentations as well. If this is your first ever PronSIG event, we are especially delighted to welcome you. PronSIG is one of the oldest of IATEFL's special interest groups, and it's played a central role in the practice and theory of pronunciation teaching for more than 30 years. We're so thankful today that we have technology available that allows us to maintain our regular events and interactions with Pron enthusiasts around the world, despite the restrictions that we're all facing with COVID. So before we begin, I just have to give you a little bit of information about how the day will work. You should have by now received an email with the links to all of today's conference rooms. There are 3 rooms. This is room 1. And this is where you'll see both of our plenaries plus a range of sessions. We also have parallel sessions running in room 2. And at 2 p.m. UK time, we are running a small get together where you can meet other conference goers and have a chat discussing some of the issues that have been raised in this morning's sessions and indeed your own experiences as well. You're also very welcome to share your thoughts and continue the discussions raised in the sessions on our social media. PronSIG is on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and we ask that you use the hashtag PronSIG2020 if you do. You'll see from our schedule that aside from our opening and closing plenary, our sessions always begin on the hour. Presentations will be approximately 30 to 40 minutes long, and this will include a Q&A with the speaker. If you have a question for any of our speakers, or indeed for us, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. This is not the same as the chat box where you can comment and engage with the speaker and with other participants. The Q&A box will store your questions safely until we begin the Q&A session. After each speaker presentation finishes, we're going to have a 20-minute break, and this time has been set aside to allow us to account for any technical issues which may make us run over time, and of course, fingers crossed, that will not be the case. But this time is also to allow our speakers to swap over and for you to get a bit of a breather, cup of tea, and of course to move to the next conference room of your choosing. All of today's sessions are being recorded, so if for any reason you can't access one, or for some reason due to your own personal schedule you have to skip one, you will still be able to catch the recording of all 18 sessions. These recordings will be with you in the coming days, so just keep an eye on your email for further instructions. We'll also be sending everyone a certificate by email directly to your inbox shortly after the conference ends. Now, before I introduce our opening plenary speaker, we do have to say a huge thank you to Sensations English, who have kindly sponsored today's event. Sensations English is a fantastic new online learning resource, producing news-based lessons from around the world every week. So don't go anywhere directly after this plenary session finishes, as they are here to tell us all a little bit more about the website and what it offers and its resources. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce you to Rob Drummond, who's opening today's conference. If you haven't come across Rob already, he is a reader in social linguistics at Manchester Metropolitan University. He researches, teaches and writes about spoken language and identity with a particular focus on the sounds of speech. He co-leads the Manchester Voices project, exploring the accents, dialects and identities of people in Greater Manchester, and the Accentism Project, which investigates language-based prejudice and discrimination. Prior to all this, he was also an English language teacher, specialising in the teaching of pronunciation. Rob, I'm going to hand over to you. You can share your screen. The floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much. So it's great to be here. Thanks ever so much for inviting me. Oh, I say great to be here. Let's be honest. I'm in my house, which is fine. But it is great to be part of such an interesting event. There's some really good talks today, which I'll be looking forward to later in the afternoon. So I want to say first, I mean, I'm here to talk about public-facing language things, which is what I spend quite a lot of time doing. But first, I want to give a bit of background as to who I am and where I'm coming from, because I realised that you know, there'll be lots of you sitting here thinking, I have no idea who this man is, and there's no reason why you should, and why is he here talking to us? So I'll explain a bit about how that came about and what it is I do. I'm not really going to be using slides, apart from just one or two just later on. I figured you'd be having a lot of slides today. So it just means you have to see me, I'm afraid, and my dartboard in the background. But just a couple of times, just when I need to show you something, I'll put a slide up. Otherwise, it's just me, I'm afraid. So, as was mentioned there in the introduction, I was an EFL teacher. So, you know, I feel a little bit cautious coming in here talking to you as current ELT practitioners, because I'm not one of those. But I was for about 10 years. I was an EFL teacher. EFL teacher, I taught abroad, mainly in Turkey, and then teaching EFL, and then I came back to the UK where I taught EFL, ESOL, EAP, and that's when I started getting more and more interested in the teaching of pronunciation. After about 10 years, when I realized I was looking at things, I found I was focusing a bit more on the language itself. Became more and more interested in the language, how the language works, rather than teaching it, perhaps. And then I began a PhD, which is essentially in sociophonetics, so sociolinguistics, but particularly the sounds of speech. But it did stem from an EFL-based subject, because the PhD came about due to me wondering why it was that when I was teaching in Manchester, in the UK, some of my students were acquiring a Manchester accent or features of a Manchester accent, and some of them weren't. And I figured that was quite interesting. And at the time, I didn't really know there was such a thing as sociolinguistics, to be honest, which it looks at kind of language variation. And so then I began this PhD, and I've stayed in sociolinguistics ever since. So I'm particularly interested in you know, accents and dialect. I'm particularly interested still in the sounds of speech, so in accents and whatever. But I do still have a connection to English language teaching, because at Manchester Met, we have an undergraduate TESOL program and a master's TESOL program, and I teach the phonetics elements of those. So I still teach kind of up-and-coming teachers or experienced teachers. I teach them more about the sounds of English. So I still have that connection. But having now spent a few years working both in English language teaching and then in sociolinguistics, and now say a little bit of both perhaps, my conclusion is that the two subjects need to talk to each other a lot more. And I've thought this for a long time, and it's getting better in some ways, but there's still a lot to be done. I think when I started my PhD, there were some people who were looking at sort of language variation in a second language, which I guess is, you know, is that kind of crossover. But there's still more needs to be done. The two disciplines should be so closely related, and I think sometimes they aren't. If I'm honest, I think sociolinguistics should feed into all areas of education, especially anything language related. I think it's a hugely important subject because it deals with real language, which a lot of areas of language education don't, if we're honest. Primarily, sociolinguistics teaches us that there's more than one English, and it explores that relationship between language and identity, which, if you think about it, and especially with spoken language and identity, you know, we know as language experts, we know about that relationship. We know that the way we speak is related to how we perform our identities or how we're perceived, especially how we're perceived. which obviously makes your role as pronunciation teachers crucially important. And I don't want to overstate this. Let's not say we're not sort of providing new identities. It's not like some kind of spy film, but there is an element of that we know that when we're dealing with these people who are learning English, we're certainly contributing to their identities in the second language. We're contributing to how they're going to be perceived, and I think that's a really important thing. I think generally, like I said, social linguistics should be part of all education, especially language education. But I think generally, English language teachers should have a better understanding of language, full stop. I think that's a problem. And obviously, I'm very wary saying this in front of, I said a room full, but in front of a virtual room full of experts. But obviously, I'm not talking about you, because the very fact that you're here, the very fact that you're part of this group, and the very fact that you're spending your Sunday engaging with other teachers to talk about your profession means that that's not you. You don't necessarily need this extra language education, any more than we all do. We all need to keep learning. But I think it's possible to do quite well in English language teaching without a very good understanding of how language works. And I know that I've seen that myself in my own career. And it always amazes me sometimes that you can have teachers that seem to know so little about their subject, which is language. Okay. Now that sounds like a bit of a kind of serious criticism, and it's not really getting at individuals. It's the industry itself. It's the training. It's all of those things around it. It's not the teacher's fault. We can't know everything, and I wouldn't blame individual teachers for not necessarily knowing so much about the language, because the industry has allowed them to get to the point where you can do quite well without knowing it. And I know this because I have benefited. So all of the things that I now challenge, the whole kind of native speakerism, kind of racism, which we'll hear more about later, and also the kind of the accent bias of sort of Southeast England RP type pronunciation, I've benefited from all of those things. And I didn't really realize it at the time, because you don't, unless you're, and then it's only people outside that can see in and think, well, this is wrong. When you're inside it, you don't really see it until much later. And then you reflect, and then you see the problems with it. So all of these things I now challenge, I know that I've benefited from, but I think it is a problem within the industry that, like I say, you can get to a certain stage and do quite well without really knowing what you're doing, without really knowing about the subject. Now, this kind of concept, it's not kind of particular to English language teaching. It happens in lots of areas, and this kind of idea has a name. I'm just going to find this diagram. So you might have come across before. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, it's very similar to a chart that I created that I keep putting out on Twitter about language pedantry. It's related, but it's not quite the same. But the point is, with the Dunning-Kruger effect is a well-known effect whereby your knowledge doesn't quite match the confidence you have. And so you have this, if you look at the chart there, you've got sort of wisdom, knowledge, experience along the bottom, confidence up on the side. And with only a very little knowledge, your confidence becomes very, very high. Okay. And then it's only when you gradually learn more knowledge, you're confident. That's the kind of dip is where you realize, when you really study a subject, you realize, oh my God, I don't know anything. And you have that kind of panic. That's like starting a PhD, I think, if anyone's, or postgraduate study, and you think you know a subject and you've done quite well in your degree, and then you start studying it more and you realize there's so much and I don't know what I'm doing. But the problem is, people get stuck at that kind of peak, at that top bit. And I think that's where a lot of the damage gets done. I think a lot of people, they acquire that little bit of knowledge. And I'm thinking about English language teaching in particular, certainly from the UK perspective, you swan in as a native speaker and you do your Trinity certificate or Cambridge CELTA or whatever. And then you're given that confidence, and then you go off and you teach abroad and it's very intense, and you feel like a real expert. And I know I certainly did. And you feel like you know everything about teaching. And I think unless you then make the effort to go and learn more about what you're doing, you get stuck and you become this expert who is kind of good but doesn't really know anything. That sounds bad. Doesn't know the language, the mechanics of the language or the mechanics of teaching in depth enough to then take on some of the roles like teaching other people. So I think that's where there is a slight issue. Okay. But anyway, you'll hear from speakers who know a lot more about this than me in terms of native speakerism and all those kind of things. But anyway, the reason I was telling you that is that's where I'm coming from. That's where I ended up, sort of where I am and how I think about language and how I think about English language teaching, whatever. But the main topic of the talk, the main thing I want to talk about is the public-facing stuff that I do, and whether it has value, and whether is what are the kind of benefits of doing it and what are the disadvantages of doing it, and things like that. So I think when I was writing that abstract, I did mention that most of us as language people, we're aware of being the kind of family experts in terms of if there's a language question. So somebody will contact you if they're unsure about, is this really a word, or does this get pronounced this way, or is this grammatical, and all of these things. And I mean, soon, certainly with my family, they soon get fed up, because the answer is always, the more you know, the answer always becomes, well, it depends, or it can be that, or it can be that, or this is just non-standard, and so on. So we're all aware of that role, and I'm sure we all have it. But all we're doing when we're doing public-facing stuff is just taking that, exaggerating that and taking that to a wider audience. And this can happen in lots of ways. So we're thinking in terms of public-facing language work, we're thinking this could be in the form of blogs, podcasts, social media, obviously, or writing articles for things like in the UK and other countries as well. We have this thing, The Conversation, which is based at academic institutions where you can write some accessible public-facing articles about your work, and then it gets shared. We can talk about public talks. We can talk about invited comments for news stories, online or on the radio or on the television. All of these things, I think, are to do with raising awareness of language issues to the public. But of course, they're not all available to everybody. You can't, you won't just suddenly be asked to contribute to a television program or a radio program. But of course, anybody can go on Twitter and social media and whatever. And also, they don't suit everybody, all of these different types of podcasts and TV and everything. There's a certain, obviously, loss of anonymity if you go a bit more public and talk about things on the radio and television. When we're talking about social media and blogs and podcasts, to an extent, you can remain quite anonymous, which is useful if you then don't want to deal with the inevitable backlash that sometimes comes from speaking in public about language issues, because we're often speaking against the tide of public opinion, which I'll come on to in a bit. Now, I've deliberately set out to kind of carve out this role, of public-facing stuff, and it does then feed on itself. The more you do, the more you comment on, then the more you're asked to comment on, and the more visible you make yourself, on Twitter and whatever, the more requests you get to do things. And once you start doing that, then you have this question of, should you be commenting on everything? Should there are lots of stories about language. There are lots of language-related things going on, and should you comment on everything? And should you respond to any request to comment? And that's that's a tricky thing to do, because sometimes you might be asked to comment on really trivial things and really superficial things, and you're thinking, well, I've got a PhD in linguistics here. Do I really want to be commenting on the slang used in Love Island, or different words for bread rolls in the UK, which comes up a few times a year? And personally, I would say yes. I think it's good. I think it's a good thing to talk about those things for a few reasons. Firstly, I think any discussion about language is a good thing. I think anytime language is discussed in a public arena is a good opportunity to kind of push in but I would imagine our argument about language variation and language diversity, and that there is more than one way of using language. And I think anytime we do this, anytime we get given the slight opportunity to challenge the dominance of a kind of standard English ideology or a single sort of pronunciation model ideology, and to celebrate accents, not just, you know, regional UK accents, but accents from, you know, that come from other first languages. Anytime we get the chance to do that is a good thing. And you can always, almost always, bring it round to that subject somehow. I also think it's a good thing to respond to everything in terms of, you know, I say everything, you know, don't be too picky. I think it's a good thing to do, in that, like I say, the more you take on, the more you'll get asked to do in the future. And I think if you want to do that, then it's a good way to do it. You know, you respond to what you can, and then you'll get asked to do more, and then they'll get more interesting, basically. Also, it's good practice. It's good practice to respond to the smaller things, because then you get a bit more, you get a bit more confident and a bit better at describing language-related things to a public audience, especially if you come from an academic background where we're so used to explaining kind of complex things in very, let's be honest, in quite dull ways sometimes. And it's a different skill to be able to explain that publicly. So I think it's good practice. But the most important thing, let's not forget, is fun. It's a really nice thing to do. I imagine all of us like talking about language. We're all language professionals, and it's a nice thing to do. Why wouldn't you want to talk about the subject that you spend all of your time studying and thinking about and teaching to other people, and sharing kind of the joy of that? So I think it's a good thing to do. So public-facing work is good, I think. I also wonder if it's part of our duty, in a way, that we should be doing this. So when we're in class, when we're teaching our students, obviously we're challenging this notion of a single variety of English, in this case, that we're kind of championing diversity, and that we're moving students away from this archaic idea of a single variety or a single way to speak. We're doing that in class, and in the wider area of our school or college or university, wherever we're teaching, we're trying to raise awareness among teachers and educate other people, and encourage our colleagues. That I've already said, there are some colleagues we all have who maybe don't know enough about the language that as maybe they should, again, through no fault of their own, it's the system, but we can be there to help that. So I think those are the things we should be doing, and then really all we're doing is extending that good work out into the public sphere. I think it's a good thing. So different ways of doing this. Of course, there's quite simply, you could just be sharing stories. I'm thinking social media here, because I'm thinking this is the one that everybody has access to. So everybody can set up a Twitter account, everybody can go on Facebook and whatever. Although, having just watched the film last night, The Social Dilemma, I'm not sure we should be going on Facebook, but that's a separate thing. Or Twitter, anyway. But we're still going to do it for now. So anyone can go on Twitter, and it could just be a case of sharing stories. So you might be just sharing or retweeting language-based stories. It could be offering some kind of reaction to those stories, you know, not just sharing them, but adding a little comment and generating a bit of discussion. It could be that you're invited to discuss. Somebody might ask you, even on social media, someone say, oh, you know, what do you think of this? And you're, you know, because obviously they've seen you comment on other things, and they might be interested in your opinion. It might be that you're trying to encourage discussion by posing questions in some way, or offering some thoughts. And that takes a bit of confidence. There's this kind of idea, well, you know, who do you think you are? Why should we listen to you? But that's the beauty of Twitter. But it can be done so well, and some people are so good at this. Just offering a little, I'll tell you who's really good at this, is somebody who's speaking later, Vijay Ramjatan. who's going to be talking later, I don't know how he does it really, but his tweets, they're just, if you don't follow him, you really have to. They're just these little kind of pearls of wisdom, just little statements, and just make you think. And I don't know, he seems to have an endless supply. I don't know where they're coming, well, they're coming from him, but it's incredible how they're all sort of, they just stop and make you think, oh, that's really interesting. So anyway, he's very good at that. So you can do that. Or you can kind of provoke discussion yourself. And that takes a bit of, that's a different kind of type of thing to do. But sort of taking a story and saying, hold on, have a look at this, and this is wrong, or really, you know, not criticizing necessarily, but pointing out that there is an issue here, whether it's with a person, their views, or a story, or something. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on, because I did it recently, and it sort of went well, but also didn't go so well in different ways. The thing is with Twitter and social media, some people will always say, well, it's just a waste of time. You know, why are you spending your time on Twitter? And they also question and say, well, how do you find the time? That annoys me when people say, how do you find the time? You know, as if, but it's just something you do. How do they find the time to, I don't know, to wash their car on a Sunday morning and spend out? I don't know. It's different. You know, you do what you want to do. I just ignore that. If anyone ever says that, you just ignore it. Nonsense. And it's something, you know, if you enjoy doing it, you enjoy doing it. It's enjoyable to have that discussion with people about language. And I think it's a useful thing. And I think when I say, if people are saying, why are you spending all your time on Twitter, if that's your boss, if that's something to do, someone in authority saying you're wasting your time, that is slightly different. I still think there's a good argument to be had. I can't speak for everyone, you know, people working in different places and different, you know, in terms of you working within language schools maybe and different things. Certainly from my perspective in a university, I don't know if the university loves the fact that I spend so much time on Twitter, but they do like the fact that I do other things that wouldn't have happened had I not been on Twitter, if you see what I mean. So they like the high profile stuff. The high profile stuff doesn't happen without me spending time commenting at things on Twitter. So it works both ways. But so I realize I'm quite lucky in that way. All of these different ways of engaging with the public require different levels of preparation. And I think there should always be some preparation, whether there looks like it or not, with how people comment on things in the media. There should be some preparation, even if it's just a bit of thought about how this might come across. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, some fact checking, even for a single tweet, which I know I do, and I know other people do as well. It looks like they've just kind of commented on something, but I mean, it's language related. There's no shame in quickly checking up a definition of something, of a word I'm about to use, just in case it's not quite, doesn't mean quite what I think it means. Or even within phonetics, I might just quickly double check, I don't know, a description of a sound that I think I know, that I teach all the time, but there's just, because the problem is, once you set yourself up as some kind of expert, even in a small way, you know, you obviously don't want to get it wrong. You look a bit silly. In terms of preparation, obviously we all have things that we know really well, like I say, things we teach all the time. But it's always good to consider what might be asked of us, you know, if we are setting ourselves up as an expert. So at least think about the questions you might have. And some things need a lot of preparation. You know, I recently did a radio program it was on Radio 3 in the UK, and it's this program called The Verb, which I do every now and then, but it was on the subjunctive. I was there to talk about the subjunctive. I know it's not pronunciation related, but it could just as easily have been something pronunciation related. And it took a lot of, you know, it really did take a lot of doing to, because it's that fear of then saying something wrong. You know that there are going to be, if you see a program advertised on Radio 3 on the subjunctive, you know there's going to be some hardcore grammarians thinking, oh, I'm going to listen to that and just see how badly this person does it. And so I had to be very, very careful anyway. But there's, you know, different levels of preparation. But I think it's good. I think it's good to put yourselves in those challenging contexts. I think it helps you see your work in different ways, and it helps. It's pleasurable to explain it to different people, to interested people, but it's a real challenge. Like I said, it's difficult to explain your work in a non-academic or non-professional context, and I think that does us a lot of good, because it's good to be able to reflect on the purpose of what we're doing. And it's good to be able to challenge this standard language ideology in, for want of a better word, but in layman's terms, in publicly accessible terms, because we need to be doing that. And I know that that's a lot of what this group does, because I'm very aware of what it is you do, and I kind of follow the activities. And so, but it's all very well speaking among ourselves, saying, championing diversity and doing all these things, but we have to get it out there as well. And I think it's good practice for us to do that, and it helps us describe things in more accessible ways. Because it's very difficult for a lot of academics, especially, to explain their research in accessible ways. And in terms of research, so personally for my research, I've sort of committed to all of my researches. I aim to be kind of outward facing, socially meaningful in some way, in only a small way, but I think that's quite important. And like I say, my work isn't related to TESOL anymore, but I hope it's relevant, and I hope there's some, that people find something of interest in it, because it is, like I say, about real language. And of course, that's the big problem with a lot of TESOL contexts, and we've all had this experience, especially if you're teaching in the UK. We've all had this experience where we'll teach our students in the classroom and they'll be absolutely fine. I mean, we used to see this literally every year. So every year when we used to teach these, when I was teaching at University of Manchester, and we'd have the pre-sessional courses. So these people coming to the course in order to prepare for their studies, either postgraduate studies or PhDs or even just undergraduate studies. And we had to, to get their IELTS, whatever it is, 6.5, 7.5, I can't remember. Anyway, we had to teach them to prepare them for that. Now, when they'd come to the UK and they'd come to Manchester and they'd have a week, of lessons, very intensive at the beginning, and they'd always say, by the end of that first week, or maybe the Monday after they've come back after the weekend, and they'd say, well, we're enjoying it, and we like your lessons, and we understand everything you say, but when we go outside, we don't understand anything. Because why would they? Because they're in the middle of Manchester. Now, I don't speak like I'm not from Manchester. I don't speak like the people they're going to see on the bus or in the shops outside. None of the materials at the time, I believe this is getting better, but none of the materials I was using gave them any indication of how people were going to speak outside. And there's this awful disconnect between what we're teaching them and what they're hearing. And so, again, I think back to social linguistics. That's why I think social linguistics, as in looking at accents and language diversity and language and identity, I think that's an important part. So it's important knowledge for the teachers, but then maybe also to bring into our teaching somehow. So my research, things looking at youth language, things looking at Manchester Voices, and the Accentism project are all about looking at that diversity. And like I say, it's a good thing to do. It's a useful thing to do, and it's pleasurable. But sometimes it gets a little bit tricky, and especially when you're going down the route of, I mentioned you can react to things or do whatever, but there's this idea that you might want to provoke a story, provoke a discussion somehow. And I say this might be to do with identifying a story that you then hold up and say, hold on, this isn't quite right, we should look at this. And I did this not so long ago where there was a story, it was online, I think it ended up in the Daily Mail. I think that's where I saw it, and it was about an English teacher, a YouTube English teacher called English with Lucy. And in the story, it had a bit about it and a link to a video, and it was a very strange thing. I didn't know this area of English language teaching existed, I'll be honest, but she was a very well known within this world of YouTube English teaching, a very well-known teacher. And she created these videos which really summed up all the kind of traditional privileges of English language teaching, of native speakerism, of accent, single accent model, and all of these things. And it was done in a very narrow and a very naive way. Now, and there was another video as well, which started seemed to be sort of mocking a Northern English accent as well. Just sort of there was Lucy and another teacher, and they were comparing their accents, and it was, let's laugh at this lady with a Northern accent. And it really didn't fit any model of how I think English teaching should be done, and most people I know. So I put this on Twitter. Now, I actually kind of screen grabbed a little video, example of the video, and I put this on Twitter saying, let's look at this. And sure enough, sociolinguists like me sort of piled in and said, this is outrageous, and this is really bad, and this is, and they really there's a lot of criticism. And it generated a bit of discussion. I thought, there we go, sort of job done. And I didn't tag Lucy herself in it. I could see she was on Twitter, but I didn't tag her in it, and I didn't. And I think this was firstly, I thought she wouldn't really be interested. She was really looking at this stuff. She was really quite powerful within the thing. She had a huge, couple of million followers on her YouTube channel or whatever, subscribers, I think. And so I didn't tag her. And also, I think bizarrely, I thought there was almost too direct to kind of tag her and say, look at this, look at what you're doing. It sounds a bit. So I didn't. Anyway, this all erupted, and we had a bit of people discussing it. Then I had a message from Lucy herself on Twitter, just a public one, just saying, thanks for kind of raising this or something. Can we talk about this? So then we arranged. So then we kind of exchanged messages or direct messages on Twitter, and we did that for a bit, and then we ended up having a conversation on Zoom, and it was really interesting, and we had a very long conversation, and all about kind of native speakerism and the problem with that, and accent prejudice. And and she began to see that her approach was problematic, to say the least. But I also saw that my approach was problematic, because at the end of the day, this was just another person. I'd sort of seen it as some big thing, this powerful thing, but it was just an individual called Lucy, who was, she was very confident in terms of creating these videos, but she's just a person like the rest of us. And when everyone started piling in and saying, this is really bad, and just kind of, there's some nasty things on social media, as we know. And I suddenly realized I was responsible for this. I was responsible for bringing it to people's attention. And I didn't say anything nasty, but a lot of people did. And that was because of me. So I felt very bad about that. So we had this very nice conversation, and we could both almost see, the error of our ways. And we sort of both posted about this on Twitter, and then lots of people got back to us from both sides, if you like, and said that was a really nice thing. I say from both sides, no, sorry, I'll come back to that. In terms of sociolinguists, people involved in language really, and language teachers, said that was a really nice thing to see, because there was it was like a genuine sort of learning moment for everyone. And it was a really positive thing. And I think, I was sort of sorry it happened, in terms of I made somebody feel really bad. And her colleague as well, who was the other person in the video. I made them feel really bad, but through that, we had a nice conversation, and she could see a different way of doing things, and I could see a different way of doing things, because I honestly think, I'm not saying we should shy away from criticizing people when they're doing something which is a damaging approach to teaching English, but we get a lot further by being nice about it, rather than just being kind of angry and a bit of a bully. Because if we do that, people just dig their heels in and are not going to be willing to take anything else on. And there's this real assumption that we're completely in the right. And I could see, and I wasn't in the right personally. I was mostly in the right, but I wasn't completely in the right. And So anyway, then from there, Lucy ended up creating this apology video to her, to whoever, to her YouTube people, to say that I was wrong. I shouldn't have made these videos, that I was privileging a native speaker ideal, an RP type ideal of English, and it was a very narrow view, and you know, it was wrong. And she made this very kind of heartfelt apology video. Now, I mean, it was very. I mean, I now I've got to know Lucy a bit. I think she's great. I think there's a lot of good things she does. The video was very, the apology video was very on brand. It wasn't, you know, it was heartfelt, but it was. I think Lucy would be the first to say that she's a sort of professional YouTuber who teaches. She does have some teaching qualifications. She's a YouTuber who teaches rather than a teacher who goes on YouTube. And so it was very sort of on brand. Now, the point about all of this is that people, some of you may not even be aware that this area of English language teaching exists. I know I didn't, and you may be kind of, you may have a problem with the fact that it does exist, that you've got almost always natives, or these are the big ones, always native speakers, always Southern English accents, creating these videos, and it perpetuates this, you know, just this weird ideal of English teaching. So you may not like the fact that it exists, but it does exist, and all we can do is encourage people to do it responsibly. And the big problem about all of this, of course, is that there is a huge market for it. And if you just need to see, you know, have a look at the comments to Lucy's apology video. There are, I think I had a quick look this morning. I think there are 12,000 now. And I've scrolled through them, and it was hard to see any comment that didn't say, Lucy, there's no need to apologize. They don't know what they're talking about. The world's gone mad. Everyone's looking to be offended. What you do is perfect. And sorry, there's a cat there. Let me just move the cat. Everything you do is perfect. And we need this type of instruction. We want to sound like a native speaker. We want to sound like you. Literally thousands of comments. And that's the problem. And that's our big challenge, I think, as English language people, is dealing with that expectation. And it's the same, and it was happening when I was teaching, in terms of, you know, students saying, I want to sound like a native speaker, help me sound like a native speaker. It's all very well for us to problematize that and say, but how patronizing to say, no, it's not what you want. So we have to learn to say that in a kind of an encouraging and productive way, that, okay, we know you want this, but you shouldn't want this. And we have to explain why people shouldn't want it. And there's still this native speaker idea of, and people will say to me from other backgrounds, say, well, when I'm learning Italian, I'd love to sound like a native speaker. Or, you know, when I'm learning Spanish, the two are not the same thing. And this is where the education needs to happen as well. Again, I know I'm speaking to people who know this, but we need to spread that word more. You know, so-and-so down the road who wants to speak like a native Italian speaker, so when he's on holiday, you know, in his villa, he can mix with the locals. That is so different to the vast majority of people learning English, who may not even want to learn English, but who are having to learn English. It's, you know, we all know it's a completely different thing. The two things just aren't comparable at all. So we should always make students' needs and wants the center of what we do, but we have to give them the knowledge to question those needs. We have to give them, why do you want to sound like a native speaker? Why is there a market for this native speaker ideal? What is a native speaker? You know, think about it. We need to do those things. It's our role to educate about native speakerism, about the dominance of received pronunciation or similar. It's our responsibility to raise awareness about accent reduction courses. I mean, there's another group on Twitter that I do. I'm a bit stronger with the London Speech Workshop, because they're quite happy to tout their accent reduction and accent softening and British English without these courses they run. And I think they need to be held up to account a little bit. So I tweet about them sometimes. And I think I think that's our role. And I think we need to be strong about this. I think we need to be supportive, but I think we need to be strong. I don't think we should be bullying about it. We shouldn't be holding people up to ridicule. We shouldn't be encouraging people to be nasty about people, because that's not going to change anything. That's just going to, people are just going to dig their heels in and say, well, you know, you're wrong, like all the comments on Lucy's videos. But I think if we are going to engage in public facing awareness raising, I think we should do it with that sense of real responsibility and in as supportive a way as possible. And I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to say. I was just going to quickly pop just in case you're interested in some of the projects I was talking about. Those are all the details of the things that I work on. So we've got the Accentism project, which is, say, looking at, I think that would probably be the one that's the most useful, because it's looking at, it collects stories basically of accent-based discrimination, prejudice, negative stereotyping. And so people share anonymous stories, but also that it's acting as a resource for academic articles about accent prejudice, mainstream articles about accent prejudice. I work on that with my colleague, Dr. Erin Carey. Same for Manchester Voices, exploring kind of language diversity within Manchester, and that's with Erin, Sadie, and Holly. And the Youth Language Project was with my colleague, Susan Dre. And so, yeah, those are the links. And I think that really is it now. I'm going to stop sharing that. So there we are.
Thank you so much, Rob. That is super. And we've had a really active chat box and Q&A box as you've been talking. So if you're happy to, maybe we can go through some of the questions.
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. And I should just say, if anyone else wants to ask a question, make sure you write your question in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, because the chat box is very busy. Sometimes questions can get lost. The Q&A box is just next to it. So our first question, Rob, comes from Kai, and Kai has asked, could you explain what causes accent bias?
Right, I've realised now, just I've glanced at some of the questions, I realised now that this is really going to put me on the spot, and these are going to be very intelligent questions. So I will do my best to, sorry, the cat is now just knocking notes off the table. Okay, so can you explain what causes accent bias? I think, well, it is really, what's really interesting about accent bias is that it's not about accent. And I think this is the key point about, in terms of language-based prejudice in any way. And I always sort of make the point, actually I usually do it at the end of talks, that the criticism about language is almost always about more than language. And it just, this idea that language stands in as a kind of a proxy for other forms of prejudice and discrimination. So we have this weird warped idea of this accent prestige, a prestigious accent in the UK, of kind of RP type accent, which is purely accidental. It's purely an accident of history. And it just gets fueled by the people with power. It was chosen as the kind of accent of prestige because that's where the power was. So if you're looking historically, we're talking about Southeast England, London, Oxford, Cambridge. That's where the power was. So that's the way that powerful people spoke. And so that accent became prestigious, and then it just gets fueled. So then people who are kind of acquiring power learn to speak like that, and so then it just, you know, it goes on and on and on. So that's where it comes from. It's just a quirk of history. What's important is that as linguists and as language specialists, you know, we have to just reinforce this fact that there's objectively there's nothing superior or inferior about any way of speaking. How can there be? They're just sounds. They're just sounds that are produced by air coming through through the vocal tract and being adjusted by the tongue and the lips and the nose. How can one of those sounds have more prestige than another? It's purely social kind of baggage, I guess. So that's what it is. It's always comes from an accident of history. One group gets more power, so the way they speak has that prestige, and then we start judging other people negatively on the basis of the way they speak. And of course, it's always easy to judge people on the way they speak. You could say, we don't want to give them a job. It's very easy to say, well, I don't think our customers will like the way, I don't think our customers will understand her accent. Really? So is that a thing, or is it because she's from a different background?
Fantastic. And yeah, I think the accident of history, that can apply to so many things, can't it?
Yeah.
We have some more questions. Apologies if you have already gone on to reply to or answer some of these questions in the course of your presentation.
That's right.
Rob. So Alina was next, and she said, as a university teacher, I've noticed that my phonetic students, pre-service non-native speaking teachers of English, often get discouraged when I talk about language diversity and tell them that they no longer have to worry about sounding non-native if they are intelligible. They completely reject this idea and see sounding native as their ultimate goal as teachers, and they object to being taught the lingua franca core. Do you think there's a way to change their views?
I think this is really tough, and I think this is sort of, what I sort of alluded to at the end of my talk, is that it is really hard because we're going against public opinion in a way, and we're going against people's intuitions, and who are we to say, you don't need to speak like that. I don't know what we can do other than just it's going to be a slow process, basically. I think it's a very similar situation as I spend a lot of time working with and talking about the way young people speak and the way that young people get kind of criticized in the UK for the way they speak, and that the schools sort of saying, you must speak in this way, you must speak standard English, and I'm saying, we shouldn't be that strict. And then people will rightly say, well, it's all very well you saying that, you have all that privilege anyway, partly because of the way you speak. So who are you to say we shouldn't be teaching these people? And so I can see where these teachers are coming from. It's all very well for us to say, no, you don't need to do that. But if that's what they want, and if they see that as a need, it's a really big challenge. So all I can say is it will take time. And so the more discussions like this we have, and the more we can take this to the public, which again was the point of this talk, is the whole thing about public awareness. We can speak among ourselves as much as we want, but we all agree, probably. But the more we can get that message out, I think that's the only way, but it will be obviously a really slow process. So I realized, sorry, Aline, I haven't answered your question because I don't know the answer. I just think we have to keep having this conversation.
Absolutely. And Hamid has kind of asked a question on a very similar front, about challenging this false belief, which you've just alluded to now, Rob. And Hamid was particularly asking about, the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And they comment that when they send in their CV, regardless of the number of reflections on teaching experience or qualifications you might have, you're still asked what your nationality is.
Again, I think it's awful. I think it's terrible. I mean, this happened at the school I was teaching at in Turkey a long time ago, and I didn't really realize, or I didn't realize how serious it was. Actually, let's say you're very naive when you first start out, especially if you've come from a sort of privileged way in, which I realized I did. Again, all we can do is have these conversations and try to challenge it. And I'm hoping there are people who are talking later, I can see, that will have more experience of this than me, and have maybe some more useful, concrete ideas. Because all I can do is just keep banging on about having to have these discussions and to try and raise awareness. Great.
Nazreen has asked, do you think that recruiting educators with accents could be, I presume she means a non-prestige accent, recruiting educators with accents could be a way to challenge the dominant English and celebrate accents? Sometimes many schools, again, same thing, don't want to recruit a non-native speaker as an English teacher. By default, accents, these are not accepted. So yeah.
Yeah, I think recruiting would be a good thing. I think teaching materials need to be more diverse. I believe there's more variation now, because like I say, because not having been in an EFL classroom for quite a few years now, you know, I'm not as aware as I was of the type of materials that are being used, but I know that certainly when I was teaching all the time, there was almost no diversity. There was no, the students just weren't exposed to different accents and different varieties. And then when I was giving a talk recently to, I think it was people at Macmillan, on a similar topic, and I did a bit of research. I just went to our language centre at university, and I asked some of the teachers there if things had got any better, and we looked through some course books together, and there really wasn't much, to be honest. And so I'm sure it's there, but it wasn't being used. It wasn't as much as I'd hoped it would be. So I think that's one way in, is just there must be more diversity in teaching materials. And again, yeah, more diversity in the teachers themselves is obviously the ultimate goal. But of course, I can totally see the problem that, you know, you're fighting the industry with the materials, especially if there's this idea that people want this native speaker ideal. You know, it's a brave publisher that then breaks that mold and includes, you know, non-prestigious accents and non-prestigious varieties. If that's what if they know that their market, that's what the market wants, why would they do that? So it's a really big problem. But we all know, again, we all know as professionals, we all know the advantages of having so-called non-native speaker teachers. You know, I say so-called, we all know that's a problematic term, native speaker, non-native speaker. But of course, there's huge advantages of that. And we just need to keep pushing that. And of course, going back to this, you know, this well-known fact that the vast majority of people learning English will not be using it, will not be learning it in order to use with a so-called native speaker of English. They're going to be using it to speak with people who also have English as a second language. And so the whole native speaker thing becomes pointless. It's ridiculous, but it's this belief that we have to continue to fight against.
Absolutely. Claire Solomon has asked, and possibly you've already done this, Rob, she's asked if you could pop the links in the chat. So Claire, I believe that Rob popped his last slide up. Let us know if that was the links that you were looking for. Dafer has asked a question. They've said, I run a mini course called Shaping Your Pronunciation to people who already speak English. What do you think I need to teach and do not have to teach?
Right, that's a good question. You're asking the wrong person, I'm afraid. I think there's two. I'd feel so awkward trying to say that, given everyone else's expertise in this place, and given the experts who are going to be talking later. I'm such an outsider when it comes to that. So I do have some ideas, but no, you need to speak to the proper experts, are the people that are doing it day in, day out, which is, I guess, the vast majority of other people here. So I think I make myself look a bit foolish if I gave something there. But I can comment on the idea of the question, which I think is really important. You know, that there are things, like I say, other people will tell you what they are, but there are things that are more important to teach. And I mean, you know, the classic one is this, you know, which you still see people having arguments about. And that's when a better awareness of language comes in, and with social linguistics, but everything, just a better awareness of how language works. And if people are insisting on teaching something like you kind of think, well, and because their students keep saying think, well, in what context will that ever be confused? In what context will that ever be an issue? And how come speakers of Irish English who have how come they don't get misunderstood all the time, or Jamaican English, or all of these English varieties which don't actually have the th sound? How do they even manage if it's such an important sound? So why are we hammering home this small difference? again, that's a tiny example just off the top of my head, but other people will know more.
Great, thank you. Yes, and I think lots of the speakers will be touching on that later today. And if anyone is interested, on the PronSIG YouTube page, we also had a great webinar from Robin Walker, who talked a lot about what we can or what we should and shouldn't teach in order to kind of prioritize intelligibility rather than native speaker likeness. So there's definitely some good resources around that can help us with that. Julie Butters has asked if you know of an international language test that doesn't discriminate on pronunciation.
I don't, and that's not because it doesn't exist, but I'm afraid I don't. Again, this is where I have to plead ignorance from being out of being in practice or something like that. Not being a teacher right now. So no, I'm afraid I don't, but I think I'm sure other people will be able to help with that.
Yeah, Julie, I'm sure that's probably going to come up later. And again, check out our resources on our website and our YouTube page. We've also had a recent article in our journal about intelligibility again, which touches on the recent changes in terms of phonology as well. Melanie Hassel has said the Lucy story, very interesting. In hindsight, how would you have approached it, Rob? So if you could go do it all again, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, or how would you approach it?
Do you know what? Right, that's a good question. I still think I'd be tempted to do it publicly. So one hand you could say, well, I'll just contact this person privately. I think someone of that or status within her world, and she says in one of her videos, actually, she's very hard to get hold of. You can't, because obviously she's got millions of subscribers, and there's just people questioning and hassling her all the time. It just wouldn't get through. So I think I would still do it publicly, but I would do it in a way, I'd be very careful to do it in a way where she wasn't held up for ridicule. And I think honestly, whether I pretend I didn't do it that way, I think that was obviously going to happen. The way I went about it, I'm obviously saying, let's all look at this person and kind of criticize her and say she's doing it all wrong. And so I think I still would have done it publicly, but I would have done it in a much more supportive way right from the beginning, and kind of, there's an element there. You're kind of saying, oh, you're how patronizing again, just, oh yeah, come and talk about this and we can educate you. And it sounds awful like that, but I'd sort of run that risk of looking a bit foolish myself if I could do it in a bit of a more supportive way, where she's able to then contact me or one of the many other linguists who commented on it to say, okay, fair point, how should I go about it, or what is a better way of going about it, which is the result we got to, but there was a lot of negative stuff in between. So I would do it publicly, but in a more supportive way.
Great, thank you, Rob. Aoife has asked, for teaching purposes, is the idea of accent addition rather than reduction helpful, or does it just perpetuate accentism?
I think that's fine. I think accent addition, I think obviously we all know accent reduction is problematic, accent softening, because there's no such thing. And it goes back to that idea that it's possible to not have an accent, which of course is nonsense. We've all got an accent. So definitely accent addition. Actually, I think, I do. I think accent addition. I was going to say accent kind of change, but I don't think that's sensible. I think that's good either. I think it's a case of, certainly when I deal with similar, as I was saying before, when I deal with sort of young people, this idea of speaking in their own way, learning to speak in a more standard or in a more contextually appropriate way. It's a case of not losing what they have originally, but adding that. So yes, I think accent addition, that's the way. It's a case of I guess we're slightly adjusting their L2 accent, their English, thinking of their L1, and then we're adjusting their L2 accent, but we're giving that flexibility within that because we also need to be able to give them the skills when, you know, when proficiency allowing, to adjust the way they speak within English, like we like, you know, how we do, how they do in their first language. They're well aware of adjusting the way they speak depending on the context. The ideal, surely, must be to get our students where they're confident and competent enough to make those stylistic adjustments even within their second language. So yeah, I think that was a very long-winded way of saying yes. I think accent addition is a good way of thinking about it. I think we're just adding to their repertoire. We're not reducing, we're not taking anything away. We're just giving them more skills.
That's fantastic, Rob. And I think I can speak for everyone, and especially PronSIG, when we are so delighted that you were able to join us this morning and give us all this information, and especially your insight into your experience with the Lucy situation online, and how we can maybe approach this and think about how we can, you know, spread the word a bit better in future. So we're just so happy you were able to join us and share that information.
Well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Incidentally, very quickly, I messaged Lucy the other day when I said, when I was preparing for this, and I just messaged to see how she was, and said I'm going to talk about this, and she was very lovely and supportive, and said, you know, that's great. And she's sort of moved on. She's doing sort of different things now, but seeing things in a different way, and she still sees the whole thing as a difficult time, but overall a positive thing.
That's really good, and it's just great that it's, you know, had a positive outcome, and that she's going to adopt a slightly different stance in future, and give that a more broader kind of perspective rather than the kind of more prestige accent focus that was there previously. So a great outcome in the end.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you once again to Rob, especially for joining us so early on a Sunday morning. It was fantastic to hear your plenary. We're now going to move on, so thank you again, Rob. And what we're going to do now is, before we begin our 11 o'clock sessions, we now have a moment to invite our sponsors to come and tell us about them. So our sponsors for the conference is Sensations English. And representing Sensations, we have Adam and Colette, and they're going to tell us all about how we can use the resource and what it can bring to the classroom. So Colette and Adam, you can take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thank you, Rob, so much for that. I'm here with Colette, and one of the things that we do is we work on Sensations English, which is the conference sponsor for today. And we're really delighted because we think that there's an amazing fit between the conference and the product that we have got. And just to tell you a little bit about it, Sensations English is an amazing digital resource. It uses news-based learning materials which are created in-house, and they're fresh and engaging. They're relevant classroom topics which can be integrated into your course books or used as standalone content. They're all at 5 CFR levels from A1 to C1, which means that you can even differentiate within your class really easily. There's also every week there are 2 new news videos at all 5 levels, and they're on Wednesdays and Fridays. And there's also a new news article every week that comes on a Monday. And the website includes lots of learning games and study tools which can be used in class as flipped learning. You know, you can use it in a blended approach, or even, as some people are doing now, in hybrid classes, meaning that all the students have got access to the same content. Who are we? Well, I'm going to let Colette come in here and start off and tell us a bit about who we are.
Hi, everybody. I am here.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great, thanks. Sensations English, we're a team of ex-broadcasters, educators, digital experts, and we've been very fortunate in bringing people like Adam on board to help us with the writing and ensure that we are actually getting our methodology and our English language teaching completely accurate. My background is mainly in MFL. I started off in MFL, and I was passionate about languages as a really small child. One of my earliest memories is lying in my bed, age about 6, having been given a first words in French book, thinking, who decides that a door is une porte? And I think that started the journey for me in terms of languages. And I've always been fascinated as to why people say things in different ways, whether it's accents or whether it's languages or any kind of regionality. I find it absolutely fascinating. I was equally glued to all the BBC language programmes that used to go out, and they used to put them all on a Sunday morning, actually, and that's what I decided I wanted to do. So I've been lucky enough to travel the world doing modern foreign language programmes, but also to do programmes for ELT. We've worked a lot with the German broadcaster WDR, and diversity and inclusion have always been a really intrinsic part of what I do and what Sensations English wants to achieve as a company. We regard ourselves very much as producing a global product, a global resource for people. And our audience is global. And most people do not need to talk about the red post boxes in the streets of London. They need to be able to talk about news, events, and things of concern to them, either in their own country, in their region, or to understand where their customers are coming from and events that might have happened there. And they need to be able to do that in English. So we make an enormous effort to have news from around the world, and within that to include short interviews and vox pops where they're available with non-native speakers of English. We've only once taken an interview and translated it because the person was absolutely key to the story, but usually it's hearing that person in their own words in English telling us about how they feel about it. And then we have the wonderful Adam taking those stories, making sure that they fit 5 levels exactly, and then helping us to develop all the activities that go around it.
Brilliant, and you've cued me in perfectly. So it is education-led content. We've got experienced DLT materials writers, and they all have to have a minimum of 10 years classroom experience at all levels in order to be able to write well with that knowledge of what leveling is. We are careful to differentiate within each text between the levels, and the language levels are checked by Lexile, which is an internationally used system of checking levels of text. There've been others for years, but this one's corpus-based, so it's really thorough. There are clear learning objectives to all the games. Being a teacher trainer, I've been very clear on what the learning objectives are, and we've included them so people know what they're achieving by looking at a game or an activity. And there are the global English interview clips that Colette was talking about, and we didn't want to just tell you about it, we wanted to show you it. So here are some clips. You'll see the flag of the country where the news story came from, but that's not necessarily where the speaker comes from originally. And this is one of the whole points of global English, is that we are using English as an international language, not in our home country, or not just in our home country, but wherever we need to communicate and interact globally. So sit back for a minute and have a watch of some of these speakers. The title tells you what the story comes from, but you haven't got the story around it for now. That would take too long.
Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful first day here in Antarctica. Be sure to dress up warmly and enjoy.
He was not arrested, but we asked him to leave the booth and to leave the fair, and we have his contact and everything, so we can go further, but I don't think we will.
So maybe if my music attracts younger people, it'll be a good opportunity for them to know about like the Buddhism.
Tropical winemaking is really up and coming. A lot of people, a lot of winemakers from around the world, they want to know what we do here because the climate's changing, and so they have to adapt to warmer temperatures, higher rainfalls in their regions too.
You know, if you step on even the grass here, security asks you to leave. But I think now they get to know us because we keep coming here. So they start feeling that we're playing safe, we're not doing anything wrong. So yeah, I think it's getting famous more and more.
For example, I can't show clearly a bottle of my wine. I can't post on social media what the wine tastes like, how or why it's good. And also there's a restriction in the form of excise tax.
When I come to here, and I feel like I am king. And you know, the Pharaoh, king of the Egypt.
We are also increasing the awareness of our guests on the problematic of climate change, for example, and on all the many changes that are taking place.
Whatever rainfall, we cannot tap them. We cannot even harness those waters. We don't have that proper system of harnessing the rain.
We'll edit that back together. Sorry about that. I've never had that experience before. So those are the clips, and Colette, as you say, we integrate them into news reports. And so they've got supportive integration. All the speech is contextualized into a wider story. It's the text around it is carefully leveled so that the context really comes out and the students are given as much support as possible. The games include global speakers' speech, and so do the tools that I'll show you in a minute. Then that's where you jump in as ESL teachers. You can get involved with those pieces of authentic speech, and you can use things like Cordwell or Fields work to do that, and I'll be giving a short presentation in the poster session later where I can show you some of those ideas. There it is. So this is the site. Just as you look through it, when you arrive, there's the newest lesson always, and then you go down to see the other lessons which are up that week, and then below that there's the most popular lessons, and then all the themes are on the home page as well. After you've looked at that, you can also go to the different tabs to go to one of the areas that you're looking for, and you can also then go in and see all of the different lessons which are available there. And so in the culture section, you'll see there's different subtopics. There are 33 subtopics in total. And if we go to the entertainment or lifestyle section, then you can see there's some more. So we've got a really rich catalogue of stories, and they're all 18 months old. After that, they start to get archived so that we're putting fresh content in. Let's have a look at the Thai Plains Cafe. And so when you arrive, you can watch the video. I've turned the sound off for this so that I can talk over it. But you've got the 5 different levels from A1 to C1. at the click of a button, you've also got the transcript there, and you can click to print the transcript as well, or turn it into a PDF. So when you click play, you can watch the video, and you can also decide to turn the subtitles on or off. I prefer them off, but that's a personal choice. And once you've watched the entire video, this was a nice story about Thai Airlines doing something under the pandemic. There's all these tools, and including shadowing the newsreader, which includes the speech from the Vox Pops as well. You can send social media comments, and you can then have a look at other lessons. So there's a list with all the lessons, which is searchable. And you can also check out the games and tools, and you can find your level, and you can search by exam level or taking a short test as well. So, and the descriptors there from the CFR are there, to the self-assessment descriptors, to help people know where they are and what they can do. So if we go back to the start now, I've been talking about video lessons, but there are also the articles. So you can see here the most recent article from us is quite a serious article about the refugee fire in Lesbos. And you can see the articles are a bit longer in terms of length, and they're really good for practicing for the IELTS exam and other exams. And there's also a listen at 3 different speeds tool, which is really there to help you with your pronunciation and your phonology and your pronunciation for listening. And it's a great tool to use in class, because you've got the opportunity to slow down or speed up the text as well. So just moving on now, we wanted to show you one video very quickly. Colette, do you want to speak about this a little bit?
This was a piece that we found. We tried to have a mixture of some things that are quite hard, difficult news stories, business, economy, as you can see from the themes. And this was a really lovely story about a guy who was completely self-taught from books and videos. He taught himself video and then set up a ballet school for other young people in Nigeria outside of Lagos.
So just give you an opportunity to watch this.
Children in Nigeria have been introduced to ballet by self-taught dancer Daniel Ajala. The lessons are held in a rundown primary school outside the capital city of Lagos. Ajala, who taught himself ballet using books and the internet, decided to open a dance academy in 2017.
For my years of understanding and reading about ballet, I know the ballet is actually for people who are actually who have money, who are from very high class, because ballet is expensive. And in this area, I know that we can actually afford the luxury of ballet or dance education.
Ajala funds the school himself, even providing shoes and kit for the children. Before joining the dance academy, many of Ajala's students had never heard of ballet. Local people started off skeptical of the school, which they now support. Ifoma Madu enjoys watching her son Anthony dance.
I feel great. I feel wonderful. I'm very excited. I see him dancing. It gives me joy.
The classes are inspiring some of Ajala's students to follow in his footsteps.
And maybe one day I'll become a dance teacher too. I'll be able to gather children and teach them how to dance.
You may, like me, be getting the sound and the video somewhat out of sync, but obviously it does play properly in sync on the site. I think it's one of the problems of Zoom. But if you would like to check out the resources and see if they can be of use to you within your teaching, we have a 7-day free trial running at the moment. So it's very easy to sign up and then play with it and test it and see if that's going to be for you.
Yep, and as you can see, there's so much that we can do with real, authentic spoken English from speakers all around the world, much outside of what we'd normally have in a course book. And so it's a great resource. I'm really proud to be a part of it. And we're really proud to be supporting PronSIG today in this amazingly important conference. Thank you ever so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you both, and I think it's a perfect opportunity because we've just been talking about resources that don't have these diverse models of English from all over the world, and you showed us some great examples of people from so many different countries speaking English perfectly intelligibly. So a great way to introduce much more diversity in the classroom. So sounds great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much to Sensations English for sponsoring today's event. It's been absolutely instrumental in getting this day up and running. So we're so delighted that they've been able to support us. We now have a couple of minutes, about 2 minutes before we begin our next session. In room 1, this room, we have Oksana Hera coming to speak to us. She'll begin at 11 a.m. UK time, so again, that's about 2 minutes from now. I'm going to put up a slide briefly, just showing you where we are and where you can find the next session. So if you want to listen to Oksana Hera talking about accent diversity, stay here. And Paula Villablanca Agurto will be in room 2. And Oksana, if you could share your screen now, just in the run up to beginning, that would be super.